The night my sister got married, she stood in a country club ballroom in a $12,000 dress, 6 months pregnant with another man's baby, smiling at her husband like she had won the lottery. She had. She just didn't know the lottery was already canceled. Because while 250 guests clinked champagne glasses and a 6-piece band played something warm and beautiful, I was sitting at table 11, the table she had assigned me after demoting me from the wedding party, holding a sealed white envelope that contained a certified prenatal DNA test, 47 documented affair screenshots, 3 hotel receipts, a 17-page timeline analysis, and an audio recording of my sister's own voice saying 11 words. Nathan isn't the father. Nathan has never been the father. My name is Lauren. I'm 43 years old. I have spent the better part of 2 decades being the responsible one in my family. The one who paid the bills nobody else would touch. The one who drove to the hospital at midnight. The one who absorbed the chaos quietly and rebuilt herself in the silence between crises. That night at the Harrington Country Club, I stopped being quiet. If you are the person in your family who handles everything, fixes everything, and pays for everything, and you still get treated like the problem, stay with me. This story is yours. It started on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before the wedding. My mother called and asked me to come over. Her voice had a specific tension in it. The tension I'd learned to recognize over 30 years as the sound of a Britney situation requiring containment. I drove over expecting a minor catastrophe. A vendor dispute. A bridesmaid fallout. A scheduling conflict. I sat down at the kitchen table. My mother sat across from me with her hands folded and her face set in the particular expression she used when she was about to explain why something terrible was actually fine. He told me Britney was pregnant. I already knew that. Everyone knew that. Britney had announced it at 12 weeks with a professional photo shoot and a personalized announcement card mailed to 140 people. Then my mother said the rest. The baby might not be Nathan's. She delivered this the way people say might not be, when they mean definitely isn't, and I have known for some time. I waited. I waited for the part where she told me she was horrified. Where she said she had already confronted Britney. Where she said she was planning to sit down with Nathan and his family and tell them the truth. Because a man who had spent $85,000 on a wedding, $60,000 on a ring, $40,000 on a honeymoon, and had just added Britney to his financial accounts. That man deserved the truth before he became legally entangled with a lie. That part never came. What came instead was my mother explaining in a careful and reasonable tone that Nathan was a wonderful man, that he was already planning to support the baby, that once they were married and bonded with the child it wouldn't really matter how the child came to be, and that the kindest thing, for everyone, was to let the wedding proceed without disruption. I want to make sure you absorbed that. My mother's position was that committing paternity fraud against a man worth over $2 million was acceptable because he seemed like he would be a good father anyway. That was her actual moral framework. Then she said the thing I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said that a proper prenatal DNA test, certified, legally admissible, cost somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000. And that since Lauren was the successful one, Lauren could probably help cover it. I looked at her. Let me be completely clear about what she was asking. She was not asking me to fund a test so she could confront Britney with proof. She was not asking me to fund a test so Nathan could know the truth. She was asking me to use my salary to purchase confirmation of the fraud so that the two of them could plan the cover-up more efficiently. She wanted me to bankroll a crime. The successful one. That was how she framed it. As if the $200,000 I had earned through 20 years of work and discipline was a shared family resource that could be allocated toward her younger daughter's scheme. I said I needed to think about it. I drove home. I sat in my car in my driveway for a few minutes, and then I went inside and started working. Here is what you need to understand about Britney before any of the rest of this makes sense. She had never, in 34 years, faced a consequence she couldn't escape. When she was 22, she ran up $18,000 in credit card debt, Spa treatments, clothing, weekends away with men who weren't worth the fuel cost to go meet them. My mother paid it. Every cent. When she was 25, she was evicted from her apartment for the second time in 3 years. Not because she couldn't afford rent. Because she paid other things first. My mother co-signed her next lease. When she was 28, she had an affair with a man whose wife eventually called our mother directly. He was furious. He had names. He had dates. My mother told her she was being dramatic and ended the call. When she was 30, she borrowed $9,000 from our father. He was undergoing chemotherapy at the time. Prostate cancer, 3rd year of treatment. She told him it was an emergency. We found out 6 weeks later that the emergency was a vacation to Cancun. Flights, resort excursions, the full package. He sent our father a postcard from the beach. He died 14 months later. He never asked for the money back. He never received an apology. I paid his final medical bills. $62,000 across the last 4 months of his life. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I am telling you because the financial accounting in my family had a very clear and consistent structure. Brittany spent, my mother covered, and Lauren paid whatever remained. What this created in Brittany was not just selfishness. Selfishness is ordinary. What it created was something more specific. A genuine, functioning belief that consequences were things that happened to other people. That the rules of cause and effect applied universally except to her. That beauty and charm and the right tears at the right moment would always produce a rescue. She had never been wrong about that. Not once. I watched her and Nathan together over 18 months, and I want to be honest with you. She was good at the performance. She could do warmth. She could do gratitude. She could do the luminous, devoted girlfriend with real technical skill. But I had known her for 34 years. I knew the difference between Brittany performing and Brittany feeling. Nathan Whitmore was 39 years old. Senior financial advisor at a private wealth management firm. $320,000 a year in income. He owned a $1.3 million waterfront property outright. His investment portfolio was valued at $420,000. His retirement account sat above $700,000. But what I noticed about Nathan, what I think Brittany was not capable of noticing because she was too focused on the asset value, was that he was decent. He was patient and self-deprecating and genuinely curious about other people. He remembered details. He asked follow-up questions. He was the kind of man who, when you told him something hard had happened to you, did not immediately tell you a parallel story about himself. He loved my sister in an unguarded, almost reckless way. He was not performing it. It was simply true. And Brittany looked at him the way a person looks at a house they've decided to move into. She appreciated his accounts, his address, his calendar, his stability. She did not appreciate him. Ryan Mercer I had met once, briefly, at a family barbecue about 2 years earlier. Brittany introduced him as a friend of a friend. 38 years old. Worked irregular construction jobs. Had 2 kids with a wife he described as his ex, but was not yet legally his ex. Handsome in the way some men are handsome. Immediately, and then less so the more you paid attention. I thought nothing of it at the time. I should have paid more attention. I want to be precise about how I found the evidence because I wanted on record that I was not searching for it. 4 days after my mother's kitchen conversation, I returned to her house to help organize vendor confirmations for the wedding. There were outstanding invoices and a seating chart spreadsheet that Brittany had set up on a shared planning folder. Brittany had left earlier in a rush, a final fitting appointment, and she had left her tablet on the kitchen counter. Unlocked. Face up. My mother was in the other room. I tapped the screen to wake it up and navigate to the shared planning folder. The Messages app was already open. The first thing I saw, I registered before I understood it. Then I understood it. I set the tablet down. I picked it up again. I started reading. The conversation thread between Brittany and Ryan Mercer went back 14 months. Not weeks. 14 months. There were 467 messages in the thread. I know the exact number because I had time to count later when I was building the file. There were hotel receipts in the thread. Screenshots of confirmation emails. The Marriott on Westfield Boulevard appeared 3 separate times. 3 Friday night bookings across an 8-month window. There were photographs I will not describe in detail. There were voice memos. Brittany's voice, casual and relaxed, as though narrating nothing more consequential than a grocery list. And then there were the messages about the pregnancy. Ryan had sent her a message in early February, 8 days after Brittany had told Nathan about the baby. Nathan, who had apparently cried when she told him. Ryan's message said, "So what's the plan?" Brittany wrote back, "The plan is Nathan. I told you." Ryan, "And he bought it." Brittany, "He's so happy it's almost sad. He literally teared up when I told him." Ryan, "Smart move. He's loaded." Brittany, "By the time he figures it out, he'll already be attached. That's how it works. I want you to take a full breath before I continue. By the time he figures it out, he'll already be attached. That's how it works." In a later message, Brittany wrote, 18 years of financial support from a man who isn't even the father. And that's before the house and the accounts and the inheritance setup. The man made me his beneficiary, Ryan. His beneficiary. Ryan responded with a laughing emoji. 3 messages further down. Mom knows. He's fine with it. Lauren's the only one who could be a problem and she won't say anything. She never says anything. I looked up from the tablet. I want to describe something that didn't happen when I read those words. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel a wave of emotion. I didn't need to sit down. What I felt was a very specific and clarifying kind of cold. As that sentence, "Mom knows. She's fine with it," told me something that rewrote the previous few days entirely. My mother hadn't called me over because she was horrified and didn't know what to do. My mother had called me over because she had known for a while and needed to bring me into the management structure. The performance of distress at the kitchen table. The folded hands. The careful voice. All of it theater. She had known long enough for Brittany to have mentioned her casually in a text message about logistics. He was fine with it. I sat with that for a moment. Then I kept reading. The conception timeline was visible in the messages. She had calculated it herself and shared it with Ryan, almost like a logistics update. Nathan had been in Boston attending a financial industry conference during the conception window. She stated this explicitly. The dates, in her own words, made Nathan's paternity biologically impossible. Not unlikely. Impossible. She knew it, had tracked it, and had used it as a planning detail. I opened my personal email app. I forwarded 47 screenshots to myself before I set the tablet down exactly where I had found it. Then I walked into the other room and helped my mother sort napkin folds for the reception table display while she discussed whether ivory or cream would look better against the centerpiece color scheme. I did not say one word. I want to tell you what I did in the 21 days between finding those messages and the wedding. This is the part people find difficult to believe. They expect grief, outrage, some kind of emotional spillover. There was none. I worked. The first day I created a secure cloud storage account. Password that no one in my family could guess, 2-factor authentication, no shared devices. I uploaded the 47 screenshots and began a separate document reconstructing every specific message I could recall. The dates I'd seen at the top of each entry, the exact phrasing, the timestamps. I wrote it all out from memory while it was still precise. Then I called a lab. The specific laboratory was a DNA diagnostic center affiliated with a state-certified medical testing facility. They offered non-invasive prenatal paternity testing. A maternal blood draw, completely safe for the baby, no procedure required beyond a standard venipuncture appointment. The test required a comparative DNA sample from each possible father. Results were certified and legally admissible in court proceedings. Standard turnaround, 8 to 10 business days. Expedited. Available for an additional processing fee. The test cost $1,625. I paid for it myself. Obtaining Ryan's DNA required a degree of composure I'm not going to pretend was effortless. He was attending the rehearsal dinner. Brittany had listed him on the guest roster as a family friend, and I arrived 40 minutes early. He used a water glass during the cocktail hour. He set it down when someone called him across the room. I was standing close enough. I wrapped the glass in a cloth napkin I had brought specifically for this purpose and placed it in my bag. I know precisely how that sounds. I also know that a man who had spent 14 months planning to allow another man to spend $2 million supporting his biological child had exhausted any reasonable claim to my ethical consideration over a water glass. I also stood 3 feet away from Ryan Mercer at that rehearsal dinner, and he had no idea what I was doing. He shook my hand. He said it was a beautiful event. He made a joke about the open bar. He was easy and relaxed. The relaxation of a man who had already handed the bill to someone else and walked away clean. He had already exited the situation in his own mind. Nathan was going to handle everything. I smiled. I agreed the event was beautiful. I excused myself. I put the glass in my bag and I thought, in 6 days this water glass is going to end the plan you both thought was foolproof. The maternal blood draw was completed the following morning at a walk-in lab. I submitted both samples under a case number. I paid for expedited processing. 6 days before the wedding, the results arrived in my email. Probability that Ryan Mercer was the biological father of Brittany Mitchell's unborn child. 99.9999%. Probability that Nathan Whitmore was the biological father. 0%. I printed 4 copies. 1 copy was certified and notarized at a legal document service that same afternoon. 1 copy went into my safety deposit box at the bank. 1 copy was emailed to a personal account I accessed only from my office computer. The 4th copy was set aside for the envelope. Then I built the rest of the package. Because a DNA result alone tells one story. But a DNA result accompanied by dated hotel receipts, a documented affair timeline, and an audio recording of the pregnant woman saying, "Nathan isn't the father" in her own voice, that tells a complete story. One that cannot be reframed or dismantled or spun. I converted 3 of the voice memos from the tablet. During those 90 minutes in my mother's kitchen, I had had the presence of mind to hold my phone close to the tablet speaker and record the audio files playing. 3 clips. The one I needed most was 11 seconds long. Clear audio. Unmistakably Brittany's voice. I created a timeline document. Every hotel booking by date, every relevant message excerpt with timestamp, the Boston conference dates, the conception window, the pregnancy announcement date, a clinical side-by-side comparison demonstrating the biological impossibility. I formatted it the way I format project deliverables at work. Headers. Numbered evidence categories. Source citations. The complete package ran 31 pages. I placed the most critical items, the DNA results, the timeline, the printed message excerpts, and a USB drive containing the audio files, in a sealed white envelope. That envelope went into my purse on the morning of the wedding. And through all of this I showed up to every event. I smiled at the relatives. I made polite conversation with Nathan's mother, who was warm and genuine and told me how happy she was that her son had finally found someone who made him that kind of happy. I smiled and said I was glad too. I was protecting one person in that room. And it was not my sister. If you have ever stayed completely calm when someone expected you to be upset, you know what it does to a certain kind of person. They don't conclude that you're plotting. They conclude that you've surrendered. Silence reads to them as defeat. Brittany concluded I had surrendered. In the 2 weeks before the wedding, she became something I can only describe as luminous with certainty. She had decided the Lauren problem was resolved, the secret was secured, and she was free to fully inhabit the role she had built for herself. Victorious younger sister, beautiful bride, woman who had won. At the bridesmaid brunch, she talked for most of the afternoon about Nathan's waterfront property. The views from the master bedroom. The chef's kitchen she was planning to renovate. She had already spoken to a contractor, she said, and Nathan had agreed to a $95,000 renovation budget as an early wedding gift to himself from himself for a home he alone had purchased. She described the nursery she was designing for the baby, the furniture she had already ordered, the private school she was researching for a child not yet born. She ordered the most expensive champagne on the menu, held her glass toward the table and said, "I deserve this." She was looking directly at me when she said it. I raised my glass. I toasted. At the rehearsal dinner, she told a story about how she and Nathan had met that was, to my direct knowledge, almost entirely fabricated. Nathan laughed at it. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was the most interesting thing in the room. Then came the banning. 2 days before the wedding, I received a text from Brittany saying she was simplifying the schedule and that I would not be needed for the getting ready time, would not be included in the bridal party photo session, and would not be seated at the family table during the reception. She moved me to a guest table near the back. Table 11. My mother called within the hour to explain that Brittany was processing a lot of emotions and I should try to understand. I understood completely. Brittany thought I was furniture. Useful when she needed something absorbed. A payment, a silence, a problem managed, and easily relocated when she didn't. I replied to her text, "No problem. I'll be there to celebrate." And I meant it. I was absolutely going to be there. I was going to celebrate, just not in the way she had planned. But I want to go back for a moment, because there's a conversation I haven't told you about yet. A conversation that happened at the rehearsal dinner and that I think you need to hear in full, because it tells you something important about what Brittany and my mother had already decided about Nathan's life. It was halfway through the dinner. I was sitting 2 seats away from my mother and I overheard, not eavesdropping, just overheard, the table was loud and they weren't being careful. I overheard my mother say to one of her friends, "Once they're married, he'll love the baby anyway. Men bond. It doesn't matter in the end." Her friend looked uncertain. She said carefully, "But what if he finds out later?" My mother waved her hand, like the question was a small, manageable thing. She said, "What man is going to leave a child he's already raised? You think he's going to walk out on a 2-year-old? A 3-year-old? By then it doesn't matter. By then the family is built." I listened to this with my fork set down and my wine glass untouched. This was the architecture of the plan in its full form. Not just deceive Nathan long enough to get married. Deceive him long enough to get him attached, long enough for the emotional cost of leaving to exceed the emotional cost of staying, long enough that the fraud became structurally load-bearing inside a real family. Use love as a trap. That was my mother's plan for a man who had cried at the altar. For a man who had spent $260,000 on a wedding and a future because he believed he was building something real. And Brittany, the night before the wedding, had the particular energy of someone who has gotten away with everything and knows it. She held court at the rehearsal dinner table like a woman who had already deposited the check. She talked about taking Nathan to Europe for their first anniversary. She talked about adding her name to the property deed. Just practical with the baby coming, she said. She talked about reaching out to a financial advisor she'd met through Nathan's network to discuss family investment strategies. She was already spending the inheritance. I sat there and I calculated. The ring, $60,000. The wedding and reception, $85,000. The honeymoon booking, $40,000. The joint account deposit, $75,000. The property deed she was already planning to attach her name to, $1.3 million. The investment portfolio, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policies she was already listed as beneficiary on. She was not marrying Nathan Whitmore. She was acquiring Nathan Whitmore. And somewhere across town, Ryan Mercer was going to sleep that night knowing another man would be paying his bills for the next 18 years. I drove home from the rehearsal dinner and I checked the sealed envelope one final time. Everything in order. Everything exactly where it needed to be. I set it on my nightstand. I went to sleep. The ceremony was held at 4 in the afternoon in the garden space at Harrington Country Club. A string quartet. White garden roses everywhere. 250 guests in their best clothes. Nathan cried during the vows. Not the polished kind of crying, the kind that's aware of being observed. The real kind. The kind that comes from a man who cannot believe his luck, who is standing in front of the person he loves and thinking, "This is the best day of my life." I watched him cry and I thought, "You are going to be okay. On the other side of tonight you are going to be okay." They were pronounced married at 4:47 p.m. The reception moved inside to the main ballroom. Crystal everywhere. Catering by a firm Nathan had hired for $22,000. Centerpieces that ran $400 each across 60 tables. An open bar. The live band set up in the corner. The formal speeches began at 6:15. Nathan's best man gave a warm, funny speech. Nathan's mother gave one that produced genuine tears around the room. A college friend of Brittany's gave a speech that was primarily about the college friend. By 7:30 dinner was being served. The band had returned to background music. The room was the particular combination of champagne and contentment that only a well-organized wedding reception can produce. Soft noise. Candlelight. The comfortable relaxation of people who have dressed up and been rewarded for it. At 7:42 p.m., I pushed back my chair from table 11. I walked to the front of the room. What I was feeling in that moment. Not nervousness. Not triumph. Not the particular hot satisfaction of revenge that people imagine must accompany something like this. I was focused. Precisely and completely focused, the way I get before a high-stakes deliverable when everything has to land correctly. I asked the band leader if I could borrow the microphone for a moment. He looked at me. I told him I was the bride's sister and I had a gift to present. He handed it over. I tapped it once. The room quieted. Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Lauren Mitchell, Brittany's older sister. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have a wedding gift I wanted to give in person. It felt wrong to leave it on the table. The room laughed. The warm, anticipatory laugh of a crowd already happy, expecting something sweet. Nathan looked up from the head table. He smiled. Brittany smiled. I said, "Nathan, this one is for you." I walked to the head table and placed the sealed white envelope in front of him. Nathan picked up the envelope with the easy, relaxed gesture of a man receiving something pleasant. He looked at me with a slightly puzzled smile, like he was in on a joke he hadn't heard the setup for yet. I stepped back 2 paces. I folded my hands in front of me. I waited. He opened the envelope. The first document was the DNA results. Certified. Notarized. The laboratory letterhead at the top. The case number below it. The test date, the submission date, the results date. The summary table in clean clinical format. Probability that Ryan Mercer was the biological father. 99.9999%. Probability that Nathan Whitmore was the biological father. 0%. Nathan read it. And then he read it again. Here is the thing about genuine shock. It doesn't look like the movies. It doesn't arrive as immediate collapse. It arrives as confusion. He had the expression of someone trying to locate an error in a calculation he was certain had to be wrong. He read it a 3rd time. The smile was gone. He looked up from the paper. He looked at Brittany. I said, still into the microphone, still calm, "There are supporting documents in the envelope as well. I'm happy to walk through them if that's helpful." The tables nearest the front had already gone quiet. The shift was moving through the room like a pressure change. People setting down forks, angling their chairs, watching the head table. Nathan pulled out the second document. The timeline. Dated entries. Hotel bookings. The Boston conference dates. The conception window laid out in a clear, annotated format that required no medical background to understand. The biological impossibility presented not as accusation but as arithmetic. Brittany said my name. Once. Sharply. Oh. A warning wrapped in a single word. I looked at her. I said, "I'm presenting a gift. I'll be done in a moment." Nathan pulled out the third document. Message excerpts. Not all 467. I had selected 12. The 12 that were most direct, most time-stamped, most unambiguous about what had been planned and when. Including the one that said, "By the time he figures it out, he'll already be attached. That's how it works." Including the one that said, 18 years of financial support from a man who isn't even the father. Including the one that said, "He made me his beneficiary, Ryan." His beneficiary. I watched Nathan read that last one. I had seen Nathan Whitmore at a dozen family events over 18 months. I had watched him laugh, lose an argument with a cheerful grace, fix things around my mother's house without being asked. I had never seen him look the way he looked reading that sentence. He set the page down very slowly. He looked at Brittany. She said loud enough now for the nearest 4 tables to hear, "Nathan, those are forgeries. This is fabricated. I don't know what she has done." I said, "There's a USB drive in the envelope." Brittany's voice went up. "Do not touch that. Nathan, do not touch that. This woman has been jealous of me our entire lives. She has always wanted to destroy anything good that happened to me." A man at table 3, Nathan's business partner, I learned later, had a laptop open on the table. He reached across, took the USB drive from Nathan's hand and plugged it in. The audio came through the laptop first, tinny small. Then someone connected the laptop to the ballroom's speaker system, and Brittany's voice filled the room. "Nathan isn't the father. Nathan has never been the father. Ryan, I told you this weeks ago." 11 seconds. Her voice. Relaxed. Casual. Utterly without distress. The voice of someone discussing an administrative detail. The ballroom went so quiet I could hear the candle flames. And then it broke. It didn't break all at once. It started at the front tables, the people who had heard it most clearly, and it moved backward through the room in waves. Audible gasps, sharp and involuntary. Then voices low and overlapping. Then chairs scraping as people turned to their neighbors, eyes wide, hands over mouths. Nathan's mother stood up from the family table. Brittany screamed. Not a word at first. A sound that cut through everything. And then words tumbling fast and high. "It's manipulated, she edited it, she has been plotting this for months. Nathan, look at me, Nathan, this is exactly what she does. She is vindictive and small and she could not stand that I was happy." Her maid of honor reached for her arm. Brittany shook her off. My mother appeared from somewhere in the middle of the room. She was pushing through the crowd with a particular urgency that I recognized from 30 years of watching her contain Brittany emergencies. She reached the head table and looked at me with an expression that was not surprise. She had known this was possible, but something rawer than surprise. She said, loudly enough for the tables around us to hear, "You have just destroyed your sister's life on her wedding night. In front of everyone." I said, "I have presented evidence of a fraud valued at approximately $2 million across an 18-year period. The only thing I've changed is when Nathan found out." She had no response to that. The room was fragmenting. Some guests had stood up entirely. Others were leaning into urgent conversations at their tables. Nathan's business colleagues were gathered in a quiet cluster near the far wall, speaking in low voices. Brittany had shifted her performance. The anger was gone, replaced with tears, real-looking tears, arriving with the precision of someone who had deployed them successfully their entire life. She was saying Nathan's name. She was reaching for him across the table. She was saying she loved him, that they could talk about this privately, that whatever he was feeling right now would pass. The maid of honor had left the head table and gone to find a glass of water. The flower girl's mother had taken the children out of the room. The nearest tables had formed a kind of involuntary audience. People who hadn't moved but weren't pretending not to watch either. A woman at table 7, I learned later she was the wife of one of Nathan's senior colleagues, leaned over to her husband and said something. He nodded. They both stood up quietly and moved toward the exit. They didn't make a scene of leaving. They simply chose not to stay. That was the thing that happened around the ballroom over the next several minutes. Not mass exodus. Not a mob. Just the quiet, considered decision of 250 people processing information and acting on what they now knew. Small clusters moving toward the doors. Tables pulling together in low, urgent conversation. A few people, the ones closest to Nathan, making their way toward the exit he had used, as though proximity to him was suddenly the priority. Brittany's mother-in-law, former mother-in-law, I suppose, though the annulment wasn't finalized for another few weeks, stopped at the edge of the room on her way out. She was a tall woman, elegantly dressed, and she looked at my mother with an expression that required no words at all. My mother looked away first. One of Brittany's own bridesmaids, the one who had given the speech about herself, was sitting at the bridal party table with her arms crossed and her face very still. She was not crying. She was not performing. She was looking at Brittany with the particular expression of a person recalibrating. I watched Brittany clock that expression and look away quickly. That, I think, was the moment she understood that this was not a situation she could manage. She could manage Nathan's hurt feelings. She could manage an argument. She could manage a conflict between herself and one person. She could not manage a ballroom full of witnesses who had just heard her own voice confess. Nathan had not moved. He sat with his hands flat on the table and the documents spread in front of him, and he looked at Brittany for a long moment. Then he said quietly, the quietest voice in the entire ballroom, he said, "Is any of this not real?" Not a question the second time. The phrasing of a man whose door was already closing. Brittany looked at him. She held the look for a full 5 seconds. Then she looked away. That was the answer. Nathan stood up. He picked up the envelope and the documents and he tucked them carefully under his arm. He looked at Brittany one final time. And he said, still quietly, still without raising his voice, he said, "I finalized the adoption paperwork last week. I was going to surprise you on the honeymoon." Pause. 2 seconds. "I was going to be that baby's father." Then he walked out through the side exit. Brittany made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a scream. Not a performance. Something underneath all of that. Involuntary, brief. The sound of a person registering the full weight of what they had actually destroyed. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then she looked around the room for someone to save her. Nobody moved. His mother followed Nathan out. 4 of his business colleagues gathered their things and left. Within 15 minutes, roughly a third of the 250 guests had either left or moved into the lobby. The band stood on their platform looking at each other. The servers stood motionless against the wall. The catering manager was making a phone call in the corner. Brittany's performance continued at the head table, but the audience had gone. I returned the microphone to the band leader. I picked up my bag from table 11. I walked toward the exit. On my way out, I passed the head table. Brittany was sitting alone in her wedding dress. My mother had stepped away somewhere. The bridesmaids were gone. The guests at the nearest tables had turned their backs or left entirely. The centerpieces were still lit. $400 each, 60 tables, candles burning in a room that had stopped being a celebration about 30 minutes ago. She looked up when I passed. I don't know what she expected. An apology maybe. Or an argument. Something she could push against, some emotion she could redirect. Something that would give her a role to play. I looked at her for one moment. Then I kept walking. The last thing I saw before the door closed behind me was my sister sitting completely alone in a ballroom built for 250 people, finally understanding that this time nobody was coming. I drove home. I slept well. Here is what happened in the 60 days following the wedding. I will give it to you in the same clean, sequential format I gave the evidence to Nathan's attorney. The day after the wedding, Nathan met with a family law attorney. By that evening, annulment proceedings had been initiated on grounds of fraud. In their state, fraudulent concealment of paternity is a recognized legal basis for annulment, not just divorce, annulment. Nathan's legal team was thorough and very well resourced. The joint savings account, which held $75,000, $60,000 of which was Nathan's premarital contribution, was frozen pending review by the end of that first day. Brittany was removed from Nathan's beneficiary documents within the week. I sent Nathan's attorney the complete evidence file. Every screenshot, every hotel receipt, every message excerpt, the full audio recordings, all 31 pages of documentation. Not because they needed it for the annulment. Because Nathan had a right to possess the full truth about what had been planned and when. His attorney sent me a formal letter of acknowledgement. That was the only communication between us for several months. Ryan's wife received her copy of the evidence package the same morning Nathan received his. I had prepared it independently. Same documentation, separate envelope, hand-delivered to the address I found through a simple public records search. I do not know the exact words exchanged in Ryan's house that night. I know that within 6 weeks his wife had filed for divorce. I know that her attorney had simultaneously contacted Brittany regarding formal legal paternity establishment, which meant child support obligations and custody proceedings. Ryan, who had planned to contribute nothing while another man spent 2 decades supporting his biological child, was now facing paternity establishment across 2 households, increased support obligations, an active custody dispute, and a divorce that left his already unstable finances in serious condition. The man who had sent a laughing emoji when Brittany texted him about 18 years of someone else's money stopped laughing. Brittany's social world collapsed in the particular way that things collapse when there is video evidence. The wedding had been professionally filmed. The reception, including the full audio from the speakers, was on that footage. 3 guests had also recorded segments of it on their own phones. By the end of the first week, the story was circulating through their entire social network in a form that couldn't be contained or re-narrated. Brittany tried anyway. She posted a statement about family betrayal and private pain being weaponized. She received 14 comments before she deleted it. Her close friends didn't vanish overnight. But the invitations slowed. The group chats went quiet around her. The social calendar that had defined her adult life contracted steadily over the following months, then sharply, then nearly completely. My mother lost her standing in the quiet, suffocating way that suburban women lose standing when they've chosen the wrong side of a public moral moment. Nobody called her a liar directly. Nobody confronted her. Dinner invitations simply became less frequent. The phone calls grew shorter. 2 of her closest friends, women she had confided in about the paternity situation while swearing them to secrecy, did not maintain that secrecy after the wedding. They were, it turned out, more interested in their own integrity than in protecting hers. I ended all financial support to my mother the week after the wedding. That was $2,500 a month I had been providing for 4 years. $30,000 a year. I sent one text message stating I was no longer able to continue that support. I did not explain. I did not negotiate. I did not invite a conversation about it. She called me 14 times over the following 3 weeks. I answered twice. I said the same thing both times. I said I wished her well. I said I would not be continuing the support. I said I hoped she would be okay. Then I stopped answering. Brittany burned through her savings inside of 8 months. She had never built a savings. She had always operated on the assumption that a rescue would appear because a rescue had always appeared. Without Nathan's income and with Ryan contributing only what the court compelled him to contribute, her finances collapsed in sequence. She was evicted from her apartment the following spring. She filed for bankruptcy in the fall. At some point during that first year, she called our cousin Melissa, the one family member who had stayed neutral, and apparently spent 90 minutes explaining that I had destroyed everything by refusing to stay quiet. That Nathan would have been a good father. That the baby deserved stability. that all she had done was make a practical choice in a difficult situation. Melissa relayed this to me not because she thought I needed to defend myself but because she thought I should know. I told Melissa I appreciated her saying so. I did not call Brittany. The reasoning Brittany was circulating, that she had made a practical choice, is the thing I want to address directly because I've heard versions of it from other people too. The idea that what she did was essentially a pragmatic response to an imperfect situation. That Ryan was poor and Nathan was rich and therefore Nathan should pay. That a real man raises the child anyway. What that reasoning erases is the question of consent. Nathan Whitmore had the right to decide what kind of family he wanted to build. He had the right to know the full truth before he made that decision. He had the right to choose, genuinely with complete information, whether he wanted to raise a child that was not biologically his. Many good men make that choice. Many do so with full knowledge and full love. That was never the option being offered to Nathan. The option being offered to Nathan, without his knowledge, without his consent, was be deceived, be bonded, be financially and legally trapped, and then be too attached to leave. There is no version of that which is a practical choice. There is only fraud. He had a daughter. I say that plainly and without satisfaction because a child had no role in any of this. Children of fraudulent relationships survive. They grow. They build lives that have nothing to do with the decisions their parents made. But the financial future Brittany had architected with such specific ambition, the waterfront property, the investment accounts, the inheritance, the $2 million security of a marriage built on fraud, was gone completely and permanently. Ryan has partial custody of 2 households of children on irregular construction income and a divorce settlement he was not prepared for. The plan that had seemed so clever in those laughing text messages turned out to be a plan that depended entirely on nobody ever finding out. The plan fell apart the day someone found out. If this story is landing somewhere inside you, if you know what it is to handle everything, fix everything, stay quiet while someone else gets away with everything, then subscribe right now. Hit that button. This channel is where people like us come to watch truth win. No forgiveness arcs. No therapy montages. No one learning a meaningful lesson over a cup of coffee. Just evidence and consequences and justice done properly. If you believe earned justice beats keeping the peace every single time, drop a comment below. Tell me you stayed until the end. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. 2 years later, my life is the quietest it has ever been. I bought a property on a small lake in the eastern part of the state. 3 bedrooms. A wide back deck. No neighbors within a quarter mile. I drink coffee there in the mornings in the particular silence that only exists when the water is still before the wind comes up. I work in the afternoons. I read in the evenings. The loudest thing in my life on most days is birds and the occasional motor from someone's boat. I have 0 contact with Brittany. 0 with my mother. 0 with Ryan. 0 with anyone from that circle who chose a side and chose wrong. Not because I am angry. I released the anger a long time ago. Somewhere in those 21 days of building the file, it burned through and left something cleaner behind it. I have 0 contact with them because peace is a resource I protect now with the same precision I once applied to project deliverables. I allocate it carefully. I do not waste it. Nathan and I are not romantically involved. I want to state that clearly because the assumption is almost universal. We are friends. Real friends. The kind that form in the aftermath of something honest, when 2 people have seen each other at a moment of complete truth and decided to keep going anyway. He reached out about 8 months after the wedding through a mutual connection. We had dinner at a quiet restaurant. He wanted to thank me. I told him I hadn't done it for thanks. He said he knew. That was the end of that particular conversation. We had another dinner a month later. Then another. He introduced me to a business partner of his. A man looking for a strategic partner with a background in project management and financial oversight. The terms were straightforward. The opportunity was real. I invested a figure I'll keep private. The return in the first year alone exceeded my previous 5 years of income combined. I do not lead with that detail because it is the point of the story. It isn't. The point of the story is not the money. The point is that I spent 40 years being reliable, being present, being the one who absorbed damage without comment and rebuilt herself in the silence between other people's disasters. And for most of those 40 years, I believed this was simply the cost of being decent in a family that wasn't. It turns out that the moment you stop protecting people from the consequences of their choices, your actual life begins. Brittany reached out 14 months after the wedding. A long, carefully worded message about healing and family connection and wanting her daughter to grow up knowing her aunt. She mentioned her financial situation in the third-to-last paragraph. I read it twice. I blocked the number. My mother's letters arrive occasionally. I recognize her handwriting on the envelopes. I have not opened a single one. Ryan messaged me through a professional platform I had forgotten remained linked to a public profile. He said he thought we should talk. I removed my profile from the platform and closed the account. People ask me whether I regret doing it publicly, whether I should have told Nathan privately, whether the wedding venue was the right setting. Here is the answer I always give. Nathan had spent $260,000. He was weeks from signing a mortgage amendment that would have added Brittany to a $1.3 million property. He was planning to begin legal adoption proceedings within the year. He was 4 weeks from being financially, legally, and emotionally entangled with a lie at a depth that no private conversation could have cleanly resolved. Brittany had built the entire plan on one assumption: that the social cost of public disruption would be too high for anyone to pay. She had counted on that cost her entire life, on the fact that people would rather absorb an injustice quietly than cause a scene. She had counted on silence being everyone's default. She was right about everyone except me. There is a version of this story where I tell Nathan privately, the night before the wedding. A quiet conversation. The evidence laid out gently. Time for him to process. And in that version, Brittany and my mother have a full 12 hours to coordinate their response before Nathan hears their side. They regroup. They strategize. They put my mother in front of him with tears and 30 years of family goodwill and the argument that Lauren has always been jealous, Lauren has always been difficult, Lauren has never wanted Brittany to be happy. They push for a delay. Just a short delay, they'd say. Just a few weeks to sort through what Lauren is claiming. Just time enough to be sure. And Nathan, who loved my sister, who had cried at the altar, who had spent a year and a half believing in something real. Nathan might have waited. He might have given them the benefit of the doubt. He might have married her anyway. The public version removed that option. Not cruelly. Not for the audience. But because truth, when it is this large and this documented, requires a venue where it cannot be privately managed afterward. 250 witnesses are not a crowd. 250 witnesses are a record. I sat at table 11 for 45 minutes that night. I finished my wine. I watched the room settle into the particular exhausted quiet that follows a shock. I watched the caterers begin the process of clearing tables that had barely been eaten from. I watched Brittany, finally alone at the head table, staring at the centerpiece in front of her. She looked for the first time in her life, like someone who had run out of options. I did not feel victorious watching her. I want to be honest about that. I felt finished. I felt the particular clarity that comes at the end of a long, complicated project when every deliverable has been submitted and nothing remains undone. I drove home through dark, quiet streets. I made tea. I sat on my couch and I thought about my father, who had given Brittany $9,000 from a hospital bed and never asked for it back. I thought about every credit card payment and every co-signed lease and every crisis that had somehow always become my problem to absorb. I thought he would have done the same thing I did. He would have handed the truth a microphone. And then I went to bed. People always ask whether I regret exposing my sister at her wedding. The answer is no. I didn't destroy her life. She built a lie so large it could only ever end one way. All I did was hand the truth a microphone.